So it is with a heavy heart that I assume the throne. Yet out of the ashes of this tragedy, we shall rise to greet the dawning of a new era, in which lion and hyena...
Have you ever noticed how Scar's leadership style parallels his father Obasi's approach? Both neglected responsibilities, ignored threats, and manipulated others to maintain control. This connection reveals the crucial factor in Scar's villainous transformation. The upcoming Mufasa movie shows that young Taka began as a compassionate cub who rescued Mufasa and valued brotherhood. His journey toward becoming Scar began when Obasi instilled harmful principles about kingship. These flawed teachings shaped Taka's understanding of leadership and ultimately contributed to the Pride Land's deterioration when he eventually claimed the throne as Scar. Did you know that Scar the villain we know from The Lion King actually started as someone completely different, a cub named Taka who once saved his brother's life? This revelation changes everything we thought we knew about one of Disney's most infamous villains, because for years we've only seen him as pure evil, but his origin story tells us something very different and much more tragic about who he really was. And that's what makes the upcoming Mufasa movie so exciting, because we're finally gonna see this side of him that completely transforms our understanding of his character arc and the choices that led him down such a dark path in the first place. The young Taka we meet in the Mufasa movie differs dramatically from the scheming villain from The Lion King. He's sweet, compassionate, and longs for connection, making his eventual transformation into Scar heartbreaking when you consider how far he fell. This goodness shines through when he first encounters Mufasa during a crocodile attack. Without hesitation, Taka risks his life to rescue someone he doesn't even know, an act that forms the foundation of their relationship and reveals his true heart before outside influences began to change him. Like a sapling growing in increasingly toxic soil, Taka's early kindness would eventually be overshadowed by bitterness and resentment. The rescue scene demonstrates a natural goodness that stands in stark contrast to the Scar who later betrays and murders this same brother, leaving us to wonder what corrupted such a kind spirit and transformed brotherly love into hatred. After the rescue, Taka excitedly brings Mufasa back to the Pride, hopeful about having a new friend and brother. However, this moment sours when his father Obasi first sees Mufasa. Rather than recognizing a child needing help, Obasi perceives Mufasa as a threat. His cold disapproval plants the first seed of conflict between the two young lions. Despite his father's clear disapproval, Taka's good heart persists. During a critical race to determine whether Mufasa can stay with the Pride, Taka deliberately loses, allowing Mufasa to win. This sacrifice demonstrates how he valued brotherhood over victory and contradicts everything about the future Scar, who would destroy anyone standing between him and power. This pivotal race reveals Taka's development because even with his father's disappointment looming, he chose kindness and inclusion. His desire for brotherhood was so strong that he risked paternal disapproval. This tells us that jealousy and resentment weren't inherent to his nature, but were cultivated by outside forces, particularly his father's toxic influence. Examining these early interactions between Taka and Mufasa, we see that Taka wasn't born with evil intentions. He demonstrated compassion, bravery, and selflessness, qualities completely at odds with the Scar we know from The Lion King. This raises the fundamental question driving our understanding of his character. Was Scar born evil, or was he shaped into a villain by circumstances beyond his control, especially his father Obasi's harmful example? The tragedy of Taka lies in this transformation. A once pure heart gradually poisoned until nothing remained of the cub who once risked everything to save a stranger. The answer to what corrupted Taka lies in the shadow of his father, because while Mufasa was learning to hunt and protect the Pride, Taka was learning something completely different. He was being taught by Obasi that kings don't actually need to do anything at all except look important, while others do all the work. This single lesson would become the foundation for everything Scar would later become. What we're seeing is a perfect example of how a father's leadership style becomes the blueprint for his son's future behavior. Obasi failed as a king and actively created the next generation's villain through his daily example. Imagine growing up watching your father spend his days sprawled across sun-warmed rocks. Those same rocks that should have been a foundation for leadership but instead became monuments to indolence, demanding that the lionesses handle every essential task from hunting to protecting the Pride's borders. For young Taka, this was normal. This was what what being king meant. You don't serve others, they serve you. The lionesses would return exhausted from hunting, while Obasi remained untouched by responsibility, a pattern Taka observed consistently until it became permanently embedded in his understanding of how a king should behave. The contrast in how the two brothers were raised created profound damage to Taka's development. Mufasa received the education of a true king, learning to track scents, identify threats, and bring down prey alongside the lionesses, especially Ace, who took him under her wing. When drought threatened the Western territories, Mufasa learned firsthand how to lead the pride to alternative water sources. Meanwhile, Taka remained tethered to his father's side, absorbing only lessons in entitlement and indolence, never developing the skills that would have made him capable, confident, or respected among the pride. Every time Taka attempted to join Mufasa, Obasi would grow angry, sending Mufasa back to the lionesses, reinforcing an artificial division between the brothers. This persistent separation taught Taka that relationships were about control and division rather than cooperation. Years later, Scar would manipulate the hyenas, playing them against each other instead of building genuine alliances based on mutual respect. When we examine Scar's reign over Pride Rock, the parallels are unmistakable. The scene of Scar lounging on Pride Rock while the hyenas struggle to hunt sufficient food is learned behavior, a son mirroring exactly what his father showed him countless times. The entitled expectation that others will serve while contributing nothing in return was carefully taught through years of consistent modeling. Perhaps the most devastating lesson came during the outsider's threat to the pride. Despite clear warnings, Obasi made no preparations and implemented no defensive strategies. This demonstrated to Taka that even facing obvious threats, a king doesn't need to plan ahead. Years later, when drought and overhunting plagued the Pride Lands under Scar's rule, his complete lack of preventative action was simply applying his father's teaching that kings react rather than prepare. What's particularly tragic is that Taka didn't choose this path consciously. Without any positive counterexample in his immediate circle, the lazy, entitled approach to leadership became normalized for him. The corruption of Taka into Scar wasn't mystical, but painfully ordinary. A child becoming what he was taught to be. If Obasi's leadership style explained why Scar ruled so poorly, the source of his venomous hatred toward Mufasa can be traced to something even more heartbreaking: the daily torture of watching another cub receive precisely what he was denied. Every single day, young Taka was forced to witness Mufasa basking in Ace's maternal affection while he remained trapped in his father's toxic shadow, creating a wound that festered into the bitter jealousy that would eventually consume him completely. Taka existed as a shadow cast against the warm glow where Mufasa stood with their mother, visible to the circle of affection, but forever barred from entering it. While Mufasa received hunting lessons from Ace, learning crucial skills that built his confidence and capability, Taka watched from a distance, forbidden to join them. The inequality of their upbringing created a devastating emotional impact on a young cub, desperate for his mother's approval. Each moment of connection between Mufasa and Ace carved deeper into Taka's heart. One particular afternoon, as Mufasa returned triumphant from his first successful solo hunt, Ace's pride radiated through the entire pride. The lionesses gathered to celebrate, while Taka skulked at the periphery, his presence barely acknowledged. This singular moment crystallized for Taka what would become his lifelong burden: watching someone else receive everything he yearned for. The outsider's attack marked the pivotal turning point that transformed Taka's jealousy into something far more dangerous. When danger threatened the pride, Mufasa demonstrated the courage and skill Ace had instilled in him. He killed one of the white lions and the other ran off. Taka, however, was too scared to help them and he ran off. This stark contrast emerged not because Taka was inherently cowardly, but because no one had ever taught him how to be brave. Shame engulfed Taka completely afterward. The public display of his inadequacy compared to Mufasa's heroism became the foundation upon which his resentment would build. Each glance from a pride member felt like judgment, comparing him unfavorably to his brother's heroism. Taka began to see Mufasa not as a brother, but as a living reminder of everything he could never become. The critical factor wasn't Taka's natural lack of courage. It was that Obasi had never provided the guidance necessary to develop it. Had Obasi taught him to hunt and defend himself, the entire trajectory of his life might have changed. Instead, Obasi's neglect left Taka unprepared for life's challenges. As Taka watched Mufasa continue to flourish as the pride's golden cub after the attack, something hardened inside him. The innocent cub who once saved his brother from a crocodile began to disappear, replaced by someone increasingly bitter. The seeds of jealousy planted by Obasi's favoritism found fertile ground in Taka's humiliation, growing into the consuming hatred that would eventually transform him into Scar. The jealousy that defined Scar was the predictable outcome of a childhood spent as the less favored cub. Had Essa balanced her attention between both brothers, had Obasi provided Taka with needed guidance, the bitter rivalry that would eventually tear the pride apart might never have formed. Parental relationships shaped Taka's future, but what if the most destructive moment wasn't years of neglect, but just 9 words spoken after his greatest shame? Deceit is a tool of a great king. A father's poisonous advice that would echo through the Pride Lands for generations. In that pivotal moment following the Outsiders' attack, when Taka was at his most vulnerable, Obasi had a choice. He could have comforted his terrified son, taught him about courage, or helped him process his fear. Instead, he leaned down and whispered those 9 fatal words. Deceit is a tool of a great king. With this single sentence, Obasi planted a poisonous seed in his son's mind that would grow into the twisted mindset we recognize in Scar. The frightened cub didn't merely hear these words, he internalized them as a fundamental principle. When a father tells his son that kings use lies to rule, that lying is expected, he reshapes that cub's entire moral compass. This singular moment explains Scar's later behavior. His elaborate scheme to murder Mufasa was the direct application of his father's teaching. The way he manipulated Simba, convincing him he was responsible for his father's death, shows how thoroughly he had embraced the idea that deceit was necessary for power. Even his ability to mislead the entire pride while ruling with the hyenas demonstrates a calculated approach to leadership that he learned directly from Obasi. The full impact of this toxic lesson became apparent when Taka journeyed with Mufasa to find a new home. When he met Sarabai and developed feelings for her, watching her grow closer to Mufasa activated Obasi's lesson. In that critical moment, faced with losing someone else he cared about to Mufasa, Taka remembered great kings use deceit. His decision to betray Mufasa by making a deal with the Outsiders was Taka putting his father's teaching into practice. He was becoming exactly what Obasi had prepared him to be, a manipulative, calculating leader who used deception as his primary tool. When the Outsiders attacked Melee as a result of Taka's betrayal, something remarkable happened. Despite everything, he intervened to protect Mufasa, a final flicker of the compassionate cub who once saved his brother from a crocodile. This moment of redemption cost him dearly, leaving him with the scar that would become his new identity. Mufasa's decision to rename him Scar after this incident symbolically completed the transformation that Obasi's toxic lesson had begun. The name served as a constant reminder of his betrayal, cementing his new identity and pushing him further from the good-hearted Taka he once was. Remember how Taka once deliberately lost a race to ensure Mufasa could stay? That moment revealed his genuine desire for brotherhood and connection, but Obasi's lesson about deception corrupted that desire, transforming Taka's longing for connection into a ruthless quest for power at any cost. What makes Taka's story truly heartbreaking is that his villainy wasn't inevitable, it was engineered. Without those 9 words spoken at his most vulnerable moment, Taka's natural jealousy might never have evolved into the calculating malice that defined Scar. Obasi's influence went beyond just those 9 words. His entire approach to kingship became Scar's playbook. When we compare father and son as rulers, a disturbing pattern emerges that can't be explained by coincidence. The most compelling evidence for Obasi's destructive impact isn't found in what he said to Taka, but in how perfectly Scar recreated his father's reign of laziness, manipulation, and neglect. Look carefully at how both kings operated, and you'll see the same ruler in 2 different bodies, a reflection in a shattered mirror. Obasi lounged while others hunted. Scar sprawled across Pride Rock while lionesses searched barren lands for food. Obasi delegated all responsibilities. Scar commanded others to do the hunting while he did nothing. Obasi ignored warnings of danger. Scar dismissed reports of ecological collapse. Their leadership, identical blueprints of indolence and manipulation, with the son following his father's broken template with devastating precision. The most striking parallel appears in how both kings handled threats. threats. When Obasi heard rumors about the outsiders gathering strength, he ignored the warnings completely. Despite Mufasa and Asa urging him to prepare defenses, he remained idle, choosing comfort over responsibility. Years later, when drought and overhunting threatened the Pride Lands under Scar's rule, we witnessed this inherited in action. Following his father's example that a king need not address problems directly, Scar ignored the ecological disaster unfolding around him until it was too late. Their response to challenges reveals another shared trait. Both relied entirely on manipulation rather than strength or wisdom. Neither possessed the physical prowess of Mufasa or the wisdom of later rulers like Simba. Instead, they used deception to maintain power. This was directly taught. When Obasi told young Taka that deceit is a tool of a great king, he passed down his entire leadership philosophy, which Scar implemented to devastating effect. What makes this mirroring significant is that it explains why Scar was such a terrible king. Many assume Scar's reign failed because he was inherently evil, but evidence suggests he was following the only model of leadership he'd ever been taught. While Mufasa learned from Essa how to be protective and wise, Taka absorbed all the wrong lessons from Obasi, creating brothers who approached leadership from opposite directions. The Lion Guard series explains Scar's villainy through a venomous snake bite that supposedly made him lose control of knowing what is wrong and right. But this magical explanation pales compared to the psychological reality. The perfect mirroring between father and son's leadership provides stronger evidence that the real venom came from years of absorbing his father's toxic lessons. Consider how differently Scar might have ruled had he been raised primarily by Essa alongside Mufasa. The stark contrast between the brothers wasn't about inherent nature, but about who raised them. Scar's tyrannical approach was learned behavior, copied directly from watching his father rule. Every failed policy, every selfish decision, every instance of neglect under Scar's reign had already happened once before under Obasi's. What if a single moment in Taka's childhood could have changed the entire fate of the Pride Lands? The tragedy of Scar isn't just that he became a villain, it's that he was once a cub with extraordinary potential, which was systematically destroyed by his father's influence. We've seen how Obasi's toxic leadership corrupted Taka, but the most heartbreaking revelation is what might have happened if Asa had raised him instead. Mufasa's development under Asa's guidance reveals the path Taka never walked. While Taka learned to lounge on rocks and manipulate others, Mufasa received an education that transformed him into the wise king we know. Essa taught Mufasa hunting skills that built confidence, wisdom that shaped his worldview, and provided the nurturing environment Taka desperately needed. This supportive upbringing gave Mufasa all the tools to become a compassionate ruler, tools his brother was systematically denied. The brothers' divergent paths crystallized in their approaches to leadership. Mufasa's teachings to Simba about the circle of life reflected what he learned from Asa: responsibility, respect for all creatures, and interconnectedness. This contrasts sharply with what Scar taught his hyena followers: selfishness and immediate gratification without concern for consequences. These opposite leadership philosophies stem not from inherent differences between brothers, but from the dramatically different mentors who shaped them. Taka's story becomes truly heartbreaking when we recognize he wasn't born to be Scar. When Taka jumped between Mufasa and Kiros during the Outsiders' attack, we glimpsed who he truly was, beneath layers of resentment and manipulation. Even after enduring years of his father's toxic lessons, something in Taka's core compelled him to protect others at great personal risk. This was the action of someone with heroism in their heart. The scar Taka received should have symbolized courage and innate goodness. Instead, it became the mark of his final transformation, the physical manifestation of all he had lost. Viewed through this lens, Scar embodies a tragedy of wasted potential, a cub who might have been an even greater king than Mufasa with proper guidance. Imagine a pivotal moment. What if Asa had intervened when Obasi first began poisoning Taka's mind? What if she had recognized the cub's desperate need for validation and taken him under her wing alongside Mufasa? Taka might have grown into a confident leader rather than a scheming usurper. The jealousy that consumed him might never have taken root had he received the same affection and guidance as his brother. The entire history of the Pride Lands hinged on this critical failure of parenting. One cub nurtured toward greatness, the other abandoned to toxic influences. This transforms our understanding of Scar from a one-dimensional villain to a victim of circumstance. The cruel king who let the Pride Lands fall into drought wasn't inevitable. He was created through neglect and harmful teaching. Taka was a cub who craved connection so deeply that he lost a race to keep his new brother, who twice protected those he cared about. These weren't the actions of someone born to villainy, but of someone whose good nature was systematically corrupted. When we look at Taka's journey, we can't help but wonder if things could have been different, because the path to villainy wasn't written in his stars, but crafted by his father's hands. Parental influence shapes the moral compass we install in our children. Obasi's toxic leadership corrupted Taka's compass, depriving him of becoming the compassionate lion he was meant to be, a star extinguished before it could truly shine. His story reveals potential destroyed by neglect and poor guidance. The lesson echoes beyond Pride Rock into our lives. How might the examples we set today shape tomorrow's leaders? What potential are we nurturing or extinguishing?